blah blah blah, video game movies are bad. Yes, we get it. But I think we're witnessing the tide turning on that notion. I never really identified with the blanket statement that all video game movies are bad. Perhaps they're not amazing high art to a general audience, but to the target audience, me, they have been some of the most entertaining movies I've seen, for better or for worse. But even when it's for the worse, it doesn't mean the movie isn't entertaining. A lot of people cite The Room and Birdemic as their so bad they're good movies. For me, it's specifically fighting game movies. Now, the worst crime a bad movie can do is be boring as hell. If it's gonna be a bad movie, I'd want it to go full throttle. Not talking about every fighting game movie ever yet. I want to focus on films that had a wide release in theaters and not limited releases if I can help it. Going by order of release, the first fighting game film in theaters was Street Fighter II, the animated film in 1994. That Street Fighter II branding was so strong at this time, they just had to add the 2 to the film's title. It was released in theaters pretty much everywhere but North America. This film is a classic and set the bar on how fighting game films could be done effectively. A bar, mind you, that is rarely met, but I digress. The film follows Ryu's journey on becoming a strong warrior or some shit, while M. Bison is trying to track him down to exploit his strength for his vague evil plans for his crime empire Shadowloo.
Shadow Law.
Shadow Law.
The Shadow Law is Shadow Law organization. What's this Shadow Law? You don't know? Nope.
Oh, I guess I mean Shadow Law. Ryu being a nomadic warrior makes it easier to have a bunch of cameos from familiar characters. Some of these are really quick, like Dalsum's. Based on how fascinated he was by Ryu, I thought he was gonna be a side character and that was gonna be explored further, but nah. Or DJ scene when they warn him specifically about Bison's robots, and it doesn't have any kind of payoff later. Scenes like this are obviously for the fans to point out when their character shows up and gawk at them for a bit. If you're watching this with no knowledge of Street Fighter, I don't think this film would be appealing unless you're watching this to perhaps learn the lore of the series. The fights here are very well animated and well paced. A highlight for me is at the climax, you really feel Ryu, Ken, and Guile struggle to take down Bison. I think what adds to that is this fight goes on for a while, and I miss when action movies in general would have really long singular fight scenes. It just seems so real and gritty that way. I do like that this film can take its time and have slower scenes too, showing it's not all just fighting. Sure, some scenes can drag, but movies don't have to rush themselves for the next set piece all the time. This movie loves its establishing shots, which makes me wish they recreated some stages from Street Fighter II. The film went beyond just being accurate to the game, since eventually the games were trying to be accurate to this movie. Street Fighter Alpha was heavily inspired by the film, having a similar anime style. A pixelated poster of this movie even shows up at the Sansan Mart stage. Also, the Ryu and Ken dramatic battle against M. Bison pays homage to the film as well. There was a game on the Saturn and PS1 called Street Fighter II, the interactive movie, that covered a majority of the film, but you're watching and scanning scenes in the perspective of M. Bison's robot. This movie in its entirety was an extra in the Street Fighter Anniversary Collection, albeit with some mild censorship. In Capcom Fighting Evolution, Dimitri's gender-bending Maniplus move turns Ryu into the little girl buying milk for some reason, so that's neat. This film was probably the gold standard for a while on how characters should look and act in their games and in other media. In addition, some details on the lore, like how Ryu got his red bandana. If you're a Street Fighter fan, this is a must-watch, otherwise might be a tough sell since mileage may vary. A couple months later in the same year, the live-action Van Damme adaptation was released, simply called Street Fighter. I bet money they debated calling it Street Fighter 2 for stronger brand recognition. This is one of my favorites for the absolute cheese it oozes in every scene. Like, I feel like something can be so corny, it starts to become charming.
Quick! Change the channel!
The movie got itself a decent budget too. From the insane sets, extras, and actors here, there was a lot invested. In terms of accuracy to the game, I guess it kinda is. Like, the costumes are dead on here, and some of these actors just look like the real-life versions of these characters, like Andrew Bernarski here. From his build and voice, I'm essentially looking at the real-life Zangief.
Hey! This way!
It also can't be stated enough how much Raul Julia killed it as M. Bison, giving some of the most iconic and meme pieces of dialogue in his final performance.
For I beheld Satan, and he fell from heaven like lightning! The day Bison graced your village was the most important day of your life. But for me, it was Tuesday.
This Bison is so good, I forget the Bison from the games is a bit more generic flair in comparison. Raul Julia's Bison has so much sass and personality, it kinda ruined regular Bison for me. We do have some weird creative choices though, like Zangief being a villain that works for Shadow Law.
Welcome to the Shadaloo front.
Okay, I guess I was right the first time. Anyways, Zangief never works for Bison in the games and isn't evil, just evil looking. Also having Chun-Li, E Honda, and Balrog being news reporters, Ken and Ryu are arms dealers, Dalsum is a scientist, Charlie and Blanca being the same person, etc, etc. Are we just gonna keep overlooking the fact that they switched the only two black characters' allegiances? Balrog doesn't work as the right-hand man for M. Bison, but DJ does instead? Not the best look. The cheesy dialogue and plot I love so much is gonna have to carry you through this whole film, since after the very beginning, there is no actual fighting until the climax. It's to the point where it's hilarious whenever one is about to start, because whoa, hey, that costs money? We're just gonna hold off. When the fighting does happen, it's comically bad. I feel they shouldn't have even attempted to try to replicate the special moves here, they all look lame as hell. Except this God Flip, that's pretty impressive. This film is more of a war movie between Guile's forces at the UN versus Bison's Shadaloo army. Not really any street fighting. I do get more of a G.I. Joe vibe than a Street Fighter one, which apparently was on purpose to sell G.I. Joe themed Street Fighter toys.
No way! Wait! There's Guile, Ryu, Zangief, Blanca, and Dalsim! What's a Dalsim? Oh!
If this isn't the best Street Fighter movie, it's at least the best G.I. Joe one. Runtime is short, at about 100 minutes, so it doesn't overstay its welcome. The production of this film may be more interesting than the film itself. It went through production hell, and with so many voices pulling the project in so many different directions, it's a miracle this film exists at all, really. I can't do that topic justice here, since that'd be a whole dedicated video of its own, and I have the perfect one for you to watch from Thorgy's Arcade. Specifically, the 4th part of his Street Fighter retrospective. Having no knowledge of this film's production, my jaw was on the floor hearing the insane choices made here, and Thorgy covers it so well. Because of the mess this movie is, I absolutely love this film and have watched it endlessly. It's so energetic and charming, and if you watch this with people who know nothing about fighting games, let alone video games, I think they'd get a kick out of this too. 1995 saw the release of Mortal Kombat, and I think this might be the fan favorite out of all of these films, at least to Western audiences. For the longest time, it would annoy me when people would say this is the best video game movie, but not only that, the best by far. I don't see how this is any less schlocky than the Street Fighter movie, or better as a movie in general than like the Silent Hill one, but I didn't grow up with it, so maybe I'm looking at this a bit jaded. That's not to say it's not a fun movie. It's a blast, and unlike Street Fighter, it has actual fighting throughout the whole thing, and on top of that, it's choreographed really well. Some highlights being the Scorpion versus Johnny Cage and Reptile versus Liu Kang fights. I will say a lowlight was the Goro fights. The Goro puppet used looks incredible, but I'm sure making it do a whole choreographed fight was not in the cards. The puppet's movement was limited and of course going to be slower so it wouldn't be damaged, so usually Goro would beat someone in a single punch. Scorpion's spear being alive is another interesting choice. I'm assuming this was done to better show how the spear can move in all sorts of directions and make it more exciting for the audience than just the kunai on a rope. The soundtrack to this movie is legendary. They have licensed tunes in a lot of fight scenes, which I think is the best place to use them. In the Scorpion fight, the Fear Factory song Zero Signal used was my personal favorite. The song was edited to be an instrumental version, and I get they did that to not have the lyrics distract too much from the scene and the occasional dialogue from the characters.
Get down here!
Obviously, the Mortal Kombat theme speaks for itself. What can I say about the song that haven't already heard like 100 times? Well, maybe that the song isn't called the Mortal Kombat theme, but rather Techno Syndrome. The song went super mainstream and became the Taibo class song of choice in the 90s. Funnily enough, this song wasn't referenced by the games at all until the Mortal Kombat 11 launch trailer. I wish I could find the source, but I remember seeing in a written interview that Ed Boon said that the song's scarcity in the games was on purpose since he felt it was overplayed, which I totally get from someone in his position. Calling the song hype is underselling it. It's unrelenting in the best ways. It leads with a drop and never lets up. In terms of accuracy, this film is better than most video game movies. It's based on the plot of the first game, which is essentially just Enter the Dragon doing a loose tournament format, following a small group of characters being Liu Kang, Johnny Cage, and Sonya. Some characters' depictions here became the definitive versions, like how Kano was a cocky Aussie, or Shang Tsung being so cool and suave. Things like this eventually bled over to the games as well. The movie tweaked some things, adding katana and mentioning Emperor Shao Kahn, but I think these additions fit in perfectly. The plot and characters are pretty dead on for the most part. There's this dumb thing with Scorpion and Sub-Zero being mind controlled by Shang Tsung. I truly hate mind control tropes. It weakens the characters and is just an easy way to make them be evil. I would've liked it more if Shang Tsung promised them both a burger or something else instead. Or better yet, have their inclusion be a surprise. It's not like they do anything of value before their fights. Instead of Sub-Zero freezing and killing that poor lackey, maybe have Kano do it since he doesn't get much screen time anyways. Can you imagine watching this movie when it was out, looking for Scorpion, and as Johnny Cage searches in the forest for his opponent, surprise, here's Scorpion. Another thing missing from this film is, well, the gore. I don't think there's a drop of blood in this movie at all, and I kinda get why. They knew their audience here was kids, and in order to get those kids' asses in the seats, this flick's gotta be PG-13. Despite all these tweaks to the characters and getting rid of the most known thing about the series, this film became beloved, and after seeing it for the first time, I can understand that a lot more. This film's sequel was released 2 years later in '97 with Mortal Kombat Annihilation. This movie has been clowned on to death, and it's completely justified. It somehow looks way more budget than the previous film, despite Annihilation having the higher one. The attempts at CG did this movie no favors, since even at this time, this looked like ass. It's really pointless CG too, like these giant statue monsters coming to life, and the climax having two garbled models just having at it. I think it would have looked better just having toys clang together. The plot follows the heroes from the last film, with one of them being for Jax. It skips the story from MK2 and goes for the invasion of Earthrealm from MK3 instead. The fun of this movie also seems to be missing. The fights aren't as well done, and the characters just seem to be crammed in for non-stop cameos. The fights just don't hit the same rhythm and lack the charm of the first. All but 2 of the actors have been recast, which is a bad sign for any movie. Some of the characters, I wonder why they even bothered. Like, if you couldn't get a better mask for Baraka, maybe we just cut him? What about Ermac Double here? Is this supposed to be Noob Saibot? I remember thinking these ninjas Raiden was fighting was Noob Saibot, but they have the same mask as Reptile from the first film, so I guess they just had spares lying around. Shao Kahn's depiction here is awful. He just comes off as pathetic and is not even the lead bad guy. He answers to his dad, who is allegedly Shinnok. His helmet and mask look so cheap and rubbery, and he removes it off screen, so it took me a second to realize this dude was Shao Kahn. That helmet never goes back on for the rest of the film, and I get it's supposed to let the actor emote, but Shao Kahn is a one-dimensional villain. He can look scary and bark orders the whole time until you remove his helmet in a climactic battle or something. Anytime I think of this movie, I just think of how dark the colors are and some deserts. Easy to forget Outworld is supposed to be merging with Earthrealm, since you don't get to see the outside world's reaction to this with like the media and the governments going crazy or anything. Just some statues rising from the ground occasionally. To this film's credit, it isn't boring. I remember most of this a few months after watching it for the first time, which I'm glad it's bad in a relatively enjoyable way at least. Watching with some alcohol and friends can be fun if you're just along for the ride, but I suppose that could be said for any bad movie. It just seems like this movie was rushed to catch the tail end of the Mortal Kombat craze in the 90s, and the film suffered greatly because of it. Another movie whose reputation precedes itself is DOA Dead or Alive. But how many of you have actually seen this movie? After watching it a couple of times, I don't think this movie is on the level of MK Annihilation. It's bright and colorful with some cool sets and way better fight scenes. It can also be kind of funny sometimes, and even when it's not, it's at least charming. This movie knows what it is and goes all the way into being campy as hell. You can argue that it's not accurate to the game, but I feel that's not really the case. Some characters and plot aspects are wrong, yes, but the tone and soul of DOA are still in this film. The DOA game's plot isn't taken seriously at all, and the stakes are usually pretty light. This movie is no different, with the main antagonist being Donovan and evil shades that let him learn martial arts real quick. Donovan actually does shit in this movie, unlike the games where he remains unplayable and is barely seen throughout the entire series. He sucks in this movie too, but he's a character here at least. The story is yet again another tournament format story, which is kinda dropped after the characters get kidnapped. This is mostly an adaptation of the first game. Some of the actors chosen for the characters seem off though, like Ayane doesn't look all too Japanese to me, and Ryu Hayabusa just kinda comes off as a love-struck wimp. This is supposed to be Ryu Hayabusa. For Christ's sake, this man is a force of nature that's done some insane shit in his own games, and here it's like the writers had no idea he had his own series outside of DOA. On the flip side, the actors for Tina and Bass are probably the best ones here. They capture what their characters are in the game and added a bit more flair to them, though Bass isn't in this movie much, sadly. This version of him I might even like more than the game. Some fan favorites are reduced to background cameos, but at least it's only a small handful. Hope you're not a Lei Fang fan. The costumes replicate the game well. They aren't good movie costumes, but are certainly good cosplay. Take that for what you will. They do lean into the sex appeal since they know what they're working with here. They even reference DOA Extreme Beach Volleyball.
I must go.
I love to think the other characters assume Kasumi's just getting another ball. Out of all these movies so far, this is the first attempt to replicate a stage from the game with what they call Forbidden Square. This could be Belle's Castle, since this place is just the Forbidden Palace in Beijing in real life, and I appreciate the attempt to try nonetheless. Weird how none of these movies really have any stages from the games with a fight scene. With this movie, I don't think it's as awful as people say so. I do recommend giving this one another look for some schlocky fun if you're a DOA fan. Street Fighter: The Legend of ChunLi is something else. I'll tell you up front, this was the worst film out of all of these. At least with MK Annihilation, it was goofy and entertaining, but this is boring. The version I watched was the unrated one, but on researching what made it unrated, I didn't get much of a straight answer, almost like nobody cares. I don't know, maybe I blinked and they showed a nipple or something. This movie tricked me into thinking it'd at least be interesting, which is worse. I thought it'd be awesome seeing the first fight. Chun-Li's dad kicks ass in the beginning, and it's some campy stuff, but the fight's insanity set false expectations for me since no other fight comes close to this. Despite this scene, the film is pretty grounded in tone. The movie doesn't have too many characters, maybe less than 8 in total, which is not a bad thing since the movie doesn't have to be focused on shoving cameos in, it can just focus on its story. But the story here is just a run-of-the-mill detective revenge plot that's been done a million times before. ChunLi's father is killed and she goes off seeking answers, and after she chooses to be homeless, she starts her journey to take down Bison and his group Shadaloo.
An organization called Shadaloo.
Are you fucking serious? The tone is meant to be dark and gritty, so again, nothing outrageous, which just makes the casual introduction to magic even more jarring a third of the way into the film. They don't make a big deal about it, it's just a thing unceremoniously shown by ChunLi's master, Gan. They shouldn't have referenced Kikosho at all. Just do the spinning bird kick once and call it a day. Never mind. The plot revolves around the titular ChunLi, who, just like in the game, has her father murdered by Bison. Or was he? Yeah, he was. The movie is acted competently enough, except for the dude that plays Charlie Nash. This guy is chewing scenery like it's bubblegum, and I'm here for it.
I love this job.
M. Bison is just some businessman who does a decent job at being threatening, but this ain't Bison. Just rename him to an original character and have Bison be a shadowy figure as the bigger threat in a future film that isn't gonna happen. ChunLi, I guess, is supposed to be part Chinese. Her mom is shown to be white, so at least they're not pretending she's full Chinese in the movie. Maybe some executives didn't think this movie would sell with an Asian female lead. Well, joke's on them, this movie wasn't gonna sell anyways, with the title being Street Fighter: The Legend of ChunLi. You think people who don't know the games are gonna see the title and be like, oh man, I gotta learn more about this ChunLi person and her legend? The trailers don't even look particularly Street Fighter-y either, so fans of the game weren't falling for this, and this was around the time of Street Fighter 4, so the series was back on top at this time. Apparently, this movie was meant to be part of a larger Street Fighter film movie series, like a cinematic universe with a bunch of origin movies for different characters. So think less Marvel Cinematic Universe and more X-Men Origins Wolverine. Ugh. I wonder if this movie was somehow a success, how they would explain characters like Balrog and Bison coming back to life, since their deaths are pretty definitive. For Bison, I thought ChunLi wasn't gonna kill him, like she wanted to stop the cycle of vengeance of fathers being killed, but nope. ChunLi doing a fatality in this movie, I was losing my mind. She wanted to make sure Rose, Bison's daughter, got a good view. Kinda respect that more. At the end of the day, this movie is just paced too slow and makes that 95-minute runtime feel like 2 hours. At least this movie's logo looks right. The most recent film as of writing this video is Mortal Kombat, released in 2021, this being a reboot of the MK films, and which you may remember came out at an awkward time. Due to the pandemic, people weren't excited to go to a movie theater quite yet. HBO, when launching their streaming platform, had Mortal Kombat's, among other films, release day and date on HBO Max aligned with the theatrical release. That didn't work out in the long run, and it seems this and Godzilla were the only movies to be successful despite this plan. I watched this with friends at home, since if I'm ever given the option, I'd rather not drive to a movie theater. I love the theater experience, but I got a pretty decent setup myself. This movie was a blast, and I don't really get the hate. The fight scenes are very well done, especially the Sub-Zero Scorpion fight. I mean, goddamn. These fights are brutal, which fits since this film is finally rated R. The characters are acting with a fine line of relatable and tongue-in-cheek to the point where characters like Kano are awesome. I don't think anyone cares about Kano in anything. Unlike the previous MK films, this has blood in it. The fatalities done here are pretty sick, but I wish they recreated some of the more classic ones. I mean, we still haven't seen Sub-Zero's spine rip anyone in live action yet. That's like the fatality everybody knows. It wouldn't be an adaptation of a video game if stuff didn't get changed a bit. With the fighter's abilities, like Sub-Zero's freezing or Sonya's blasts, they explain them away by saying they're powers you get if you have the MK logo tattoo passed down to you. This was an easy way for the writers to say why Kano can shoot lasers or Kung Lao can throw his hat real good. I think the audience already knows this is a goofy ass premise, you don't have to dumb it down that much. Kung Lao can just throw his hat good on his own, who cares? Liu Kang's flames can just be chi from Strength Within, or it's a gift of the gods, you know what I mean. Thankfully for the costume designers, people like Kano, Sonya, and Jax can wear pretty much anything as long as they have key character signature features. But Scorpion's samurai armor and Sub-Zero's Chinese warlord outfit, what I would call this outfit, are something that I wish was in the games. You got little references sprinkled in the movie like Chinook's amulet, and they reference the pit stage, but it looks kinda shitty. They also don't use it. Why fight here if you're not gonna use the whole shtick of this place? Let's talk about the big OC elephant in the room, Cole. Before seeing this, I thought the twist was that this guy was gonna be Takeda or Kenshi, but as the movie went along and Scorpion's long absence in the runtime was felt, I was sure he was like Scorpion the Second or something like that. Since hey, he's got a wife and kid and Sub-Zero hates this guy. You know those things aren't a coincidence, right? When it's finally revealed what his special power is, it's just power armor and a sharp top foot, so he's just some guy. Even after this movie, I thought for sure MK11 was gonna have Cole as DLC to retroactively make more sense, but he still isn't playable in an MK game. If this guy was meant to be a self-insert, you can still do that with Johnny Cage or Sonya. Hell, Kano became the audience insert anyways, since he was pointing out how silly all this stuff was. Regardless, Cole isn't really bad in the film at all, but his inclusion is just all the more puzzling. Throughout the movie, characters keep referencing the Mortal Kombat tournament and how important it is, and I think once Jax got his mecha magic arms, I started realizing that we aren't getting to this tournament, are we? People seem disappointed that there's no tourney, but I am cool with it being saved for later. This being a part of a bigger story is exciting to me, and I'm glad it wasn't just a one-off since this movie is actually decent. This is better than most video game movies, and I think is part of the positive change on how films adapting them are starting to be perceived. Fighting game films are coming, with the soonest being the sequel to the latest Mortal Kombat. I do look forward to this one, seeing how Karl Urban pulls off Johnny Cage. Will Scorpion get more screen time? Will Cole be retconned into being a character after all? As of now, we can only speculate. Street Fighter is coming to theaters yet again, and I hope this one has learned the lessons of the previous two live-action attempts. Curious if the film will actually focus on Ryu, or if multiple characters will share the spotlight. Again, who knows? Whenever I hear about one of these movies and people thinking, oh, this will be the one, I just like to wait and see the movie for myself before I get excited. I'll never forget looking for any piece of news on the live-action Tekken movie, only to be burned hard, but we'll talk about that among other straight-to-DVD movies another time. Because yes, some of these movies are bad, but those ones aren't another plane of reality. I know video game movies get graded on a curve, but I look forward to the day when we don't have to do that anymore.